Hey everybody, I am here with Reese from the Ctrl-Alt-Rees YouTube channel. How's it going?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
Excellent. So I stumbled across your channel when James, from RetroHQ, the creator of the Jaguar game drive, passed along one of your reviews, and
Mm.
I was talking to the RetroRGB crew about it, and Vanessa was basically like, "Yeah, how do you not know Reese?" So
Oh,
it's like, okay, my fault. I'll go back and look at the videos then. And yeah, I've been a fan of your stuff ever since. Been trying to follow
oh,
you
thank
as
you.
much as I could, and just thought it would be fun to have a chat with you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Yeah, I've had some good chats with Vanessa about PC MIDI and DOS gaming and stuff like that. Yeah.
So, I guess for anybody unfamiliar, could you give like the very basic of what your YouTube channel is about? Because I took it as like awesome nerdiness focused on retro PC stuff with some retro console crossover, or did I misinterpret?
No, that's a pretty good first impression, I think. I kind of predominantly collect Atari stuff. That's kind of my hobby. So a lot of it is kind of Atari focused, but there's a lot of classic PC stuff in there as well, kind of 90s PC, DOS gaming. Obviously, that was kind of a big part of my kind of teenage years as well. But ultimately, I kind of started the channel just to kind of document whatever I was tinkering with at the time. So electronics projects, building an arcade machine, modifying consoles, pretty much anything goes. So yeah, I'm not sure I have any particular focus other than what happens to interest me at any given moment. But yeah, predominantly retro gaming and kind of vintage computing focused.
Very cool. So, which were the consoles and PCs that you grew up with? What was your like your route to all of this?
Yeah, so my very first experience gaming was it was at a big family Christmas at my uncle's house, and my cousin had just got an Atari 2600 Junior, which of course was the smaller plastic model rather than the famous wood grain one. And that would have been around 1989, 1990 or so. So I would have been 5 or 6. And I remember very distinctly playing Frogger and Keystone Capers were the two very first games I remember playing in my sort of whole life, really. Um, and that's kind of what set me up on this path of loving Atari things. After that, I had an Acorn Electron very briefly until that exploded. I literally exploded. And then we got the Atari SDE. So yeah, the Electron. I don't know where my dad got that from. I don't know if you're familiar with the Acorn Electron. I,
I've only started to get familiar with retro PCs that were popular outside of the US after I
mm,
started RetroRGB. So it's kind of like a fascinating look into what I never had because there weren't really that many options. But you got to tell the story of how it exploded because
yeah, so the Acorn Electron was the cut price version of the BBC Micro, which was kind of the 8-bit computer that we had in schools at the time. Um, but yeah, my dad kind of came home with it one day, knowing that I desperately wanted a games console. Didn't like games consoles at all. He was very much of the opinion that we should have a proper computer so I could do my homework on it and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the route that we took. And used to sort of sit in front of the living room TV with the Electron and sort of play games at night and play text adventures and that kind of stuff. And one evening, kind of sat down for an evening's gaming. Flicked the power switch, and there was a huge bang, smoke pouring out of it. My mum was terrified. She thought it was going to burn the house down. Obviously, my dad grabbed it and ran outside onto the patio, and it was quite a scene. Um, yeah, obviously knowing what I know now, I guess it was probably a reefer capacitor in the power supply or something that would have been very easily fixed. But I think that was kind of the final nail in the coffin for that computer. And yeah, a couple of months later, it was Christmas. That was 1991, and like I say, that was when we got the Atari STE.
that's awesome. That's funny too because it's uh, everybody's had some kind of story about something blowing up when they were a kid, and it's just so funny to see like if that happened today. Like your parents would have put that up all over social media. Like there would have
Oh
been,
yeah,
recalls and warnings. And back in the wild '80s, it was just like, well, stop, drop, and roll, bitch. That's how we do
Pretty
it.
much it. Yeah, I mean, my dad was an engineer, and he was very encouraging of me to kind of take stuff apart and sort of work out how it worked. And any kind of old electronics in the family all ended up with me, and it was mostly supervised, but yeah, he was really good with that kind of thing, and kind of set me up on this path of tinkering with things. So yeah, different times, definitely.
Yeah, it's funny because nobody in my family was an engineer, and I was the one that, whether they liked it or not, took apart all the electronics to see how they worked and what they were like. And I didn't know what I was looking at half the time, but just taking it apart and putting it back together and figuring out how mechanical pieces went together and
Mm.
what was attached to the other side, like that was my gateway drug, if you will, to PC and electronics hardware. That alone was enough to get me in.
Yeah, I mean, I was always sort of taking my toys apart and then kind of saying to my dad, "Dad, put it back together, please. I can't, I can't work out how it goes back together," kind of thing. So, yeah.
Was he able to give you some insight and, like, kind of say, all right, well, this is a capacitor, this stores power, this is, a power regulator, don't touch that, you get electrocuted, like stuff like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember taking an old black and white TV apart very carefully, and him basically saying, kind of explaining how a CRT worked, and pointing out the high voltage parts and don't touch that and all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, it kind of gave me the confidence to sort of carry on tinkering with that kind of stuff. Obviously, if you know what you're doing, it's not it's less dangerous. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I always try to put forth whenever we're working on these old things is, safety first, because it's
Mm,
like, with computers, I mean, unless you do something like grab the power supply, an open frame power supply while it's plugged into the wall, I seriously doubt, other than that, there's any chance of any serious, injuries at all, other than somebody using it as a weapon to whack you in the head with it. But when it comes to CRTs, it's just not like that. You could reach into, to
mm.
turn one knob to make an adjustment, and, something arcs off the anoid cap, and there you go.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've recapped a few CRTs in recent years, so they don't. Obviously, you have to have respect for them, but as long as you know what you're doing, it's okay. So yeah, fingers crossed. Touch wood. I haven't managed to electrocute myself just yet, but there's always time.
Yeah, I always tell people the reason I haven't gotten shocked by a CRT was the same reason I never crashed my motorcycle, is because if you approach it
Mm,
terrified, then it's very, very less of a chance of things going wrong.
mm,
So it's just terrified where, like, you still do it, but you have respect for it while you're
mm.
doing it. That way it's, and it's easy to keep that at the forefront. It was way easier on a motorcycle, because if you're dipping around a corner at 120, it's a little easier to remember, like, hey, you could die real quick. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a slightly more impressive way to go than electrocuted by a CRT, but
If I had to choose, like, neither of them sound like a
no.
nice way to die, but if I had to choose, going around a corner at a buck 20, definitely, because that'll be like, that'll be quick and painless, kind of badass in a weird way.
Yeah,
Working on my arcade machine, and I slipped and fell and got my hand jammed underneath the power circuit. Not really a good story to tell.
no, no.
So, what brought you transitioning from being a kid using this stuff, enjoying it, to now being an adult that does a lot of very cool videos about them? Were you always kind of in the scene, working on this stuff? Did you have like a nostalgic resurgence that got you back into it? What kind of started your YouTube channel?
Yeah, I've always kind of dipped in and out of the whole retro thing and the old computer thing and that kind of stuff. Um, I kind of got out of it for a while when I was a teenager, and it was more about current gaming PCs and that kind of thing, and obviously the Voodoo era and the early GeForce cards and that kind of stuff. Very much up my street. And then it was kind of around the early 2000s, and I kind of dug out the old Atari STE. It was around the time I was kind of moving out from my parents' house and kind of going through my old stuff, and just kind of thought, oh, okay, and started to look at some of the forums and things, and obviously there were new upgrades for them, internal hard drive interfaces and stuff that people had come up with that you could buy the kits for and install yourself. And um, yeah, so I tinkered with that for a while, bought some more Atari stuff, got into the 2600 again and the Jaguar. or the Jaguar, as you say. And that's the thing that always comes up when you have an English guest on the show. Um, yeah. As far as the actual YouTube channel's concerned, I mean, I've been watching YouTube for a long time. It's kind of the main source of entertainment in our house, and has been for a very long time. We kind of fell out of love with mainstream TV and that kind of stuff. So I was watching a lot of the kind of the early pioneers, like Angry Video Game Nerd and
Mhm.
Ashens and people like that, 8-Bit Guy, LGR. Um, and I kind of always wanted to do it and always wanted to get into it. And I've always made videos. It's always kind of been a part of my life. My parents had a camcorder when I was a kid, and I used to make like magic videos and silly stuff like that. And then throughout college and university, I had video cameras, and I kind of did silly little things in Windows Movie Maker and iMovie and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so started posted some pictures on my Instagram account a few years back. Um, actually built up quite a following on there. But I made the mistake of not keeping the hobby side of things and my personal life separate. So the account was in my own name, and obviously it was the same account that I used to post pictures of holiday photos and family stuff and that kind of thing. And I ended up with more and more kind of random strangers commenting on that stuff, and I kind of thought, no, I need to separate this out into something separate. So um, a friend of mine came up with the name Ctrl-Alt-Rees, and I thought, yeah, that's great. That works. Set up a new Instagram account, built up following around 1,000 people on there, and don't know, just decided it was time to kind of make the jump to YouTube. So I was modifying Nintendo Famicoms and Atari 2600s and kind of selling them on eBay on the side at the time. And a guy called Jason Bradbury contacted me. I don't know if you're familiar with Jason Bradbury.
Sounds
Um,
familiar.
yeah, he hosts a TV show in the UK, or he used to anyway, called The Gadget Show, which was quite big. And he's quite big in kind of the British tech scene, and quite a well-known journalist and stuff. And he wanted some old consoles. He wanted me to basically source them and modify them for him to use on his social media accounts. And I don't know why he picked me specifically, because I was still a relative nobody at the time. But I thought, well, if ever there was an opportunity to launch a YouTube channel and name drop a big celebrity, this is it. So the actual 2600 that I modified for him, I recorded the process and thought, no, I'm going to make a proper go of this, and that was my first video on the channel. And yeah, that was October, I think October 2019. That went up, and I haven't stopped since. Every week or so, every couple of weeks, I've managed to keep up the momentum and keep putting stuff out there.
That's really cool. That's a fun story. I'm glad to
Hmm.
hear that. Do you like how do you choose your videos? Just what you're working on at that moment? Do you have subjects that you specifically want to cover? Or are you just kind of having fun doing it, as you feel like?
A combination of the three. I have a list as long as my arm of video ideas and stuff I want to cover in future, and I have a whole room full of half finished and broken stuff that I really need to get around to. And I've there's kind of this YouTuber's curse when you do this stuff on YouTube that obviously I don't want to touch anything that needs fixing because I could make a video about it. So I have shelves full of stuff that's kind of half finished and not working because obviously you have all that overhead of setting the cameras up and getting stuff recorded and trying to sort of tell a story and everything. Um,
I think you just like everybody that makes videos, whether it's for a day job or whether it's just for casual fun. I think everybody listening right now just did that same like, and
mm,
they looked over at the boxes. And I'm personally, I have like 4 boxes worth of stuff. A friend of mine bought a bunch of stuff off of me, and I was like, "Would you mind if I sent it out as I did videos on it?" And they were like, "Oh, that's even cooler." I mean, I'm a year behind.
yeah,
So-
yeah. I mean, I've got stuff that people. I mean, I there's a thing like, to do with donations, and I'd obviously I think there are people who've kind of got in trouble for it before and coming across as ungrateful and stuff because of obviously people donating stuff to the channel and then kind of saying no, please stop sending me stuff. I've got far too much stuff. But I've actually found myself, even with the channel being kind of the small size that it is, I'm in that situation as well. I've had a couple of people send stuff to me and say, "Oh, it's fine. Just get around to it when you can. Just make a, just want to make a fun video out of it." And I've got stuff in boxes that I've had for over a year now. That yeah, sometimes they keep me awake at night, thinking, these people expecting something out of me sooner rather than later. Or so, yeah.
I think as long as you manage expectations, everybody's cool
Yeah,
with that.
yeah. No, I'm really lucky with the channel that one thing that I've kind of always focused on from day one with the channel is kind of the community and the people around it. So I have a Discord server and I have a Patreon, and I'm very much, constantly communicating with people and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's a really great community to be a part of. So
Yeah, and I've definitely found that the type of videos people make and the personality that you put forth in that video is a big determining factor in the community that you build around it.
mm,
So, Voltar is a good friend of mine. He
mm,
likes being silly, so sometimes he gets commenters that think it's okay to be a little too silly, but that's just kind of part of what he does, and that's cool too. But I really appreciate the other side of that, especially when it comes to the nerd side of things. Because
mm.
if we were hanging out at a pub, fine, bring the silly. That's the time and the place. I'm all for it. But when I come in looking for the answer to a technical question, I want to be surrounded by nerds, not comedians. So shout out to Lewis. No offense, but like, so I think it's very easy to see how you could get such a good community out of your videos because they're factually correct. They're well shot. I mean, you make good videos, so
Oh,
I think
thank you.
just you don't fill them with crap. So that's the type of audience that you've catered. Then is a good audience around that. So
That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, some people like to court controversy a bit and kind of rock the boat and cause trouble, and they like the attention that they get from that. But the trouble is, you attract the kind of people that also like to cause trouble. So I tend to stay away from all that. It's funny you should mention
smart.
Volta. It took me a while to work him out. I mean, I've been a subscriber to his channel and followed him on social media for years now. And at first, it was kind of like, oh, he's a bit in your face, a bit a bit loud. But I think once you get to know him and you kind of get to know his stuff, he's obviously a very genuine guy, and he's obviously a very clever guy, and really knows his stuff. So yeah, I do have a lot of respect for him.
It's funny. The first time I ever messaged him, I was on a forum and I saw he mentioned something that he did a mod that no one else had really done it that way,
Mm.
and I kind of wanted to know more about it. And I started typing the DM, and I go to hit send, and I took a deep breath, and I'm like, I really don't want to fucking talk to this guy. He's such a dick. I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to have to sit there and listen to him. I don't want to. I'm like, you know what? It's for the greater good. It'll end up on the website. And I hit send, and the response that I got was, a little bit like, here's the answer to your question. I kind of being cautious. And then 3 or 4 messages later, we're talking on Skype, and I
Mm.
realized who he really is. And it's one of those like, oh, okay, this guy's got a giant heart and works really hard to help people. And he's also a dick at the same time. So
Yeah,
it's,
exactly. You can do
you
that and
know,
still be a dick.
yeah. So
No,
it's an odd character.
yeah, I think I made a very very bad first impression on him because I had a really weird Twitter bug where just overnight Twitter just seemed to block pretty much everyone that I followed. Um, and I still can't work out. I tweeted about it at the time, and I had quite a few people reply saying, "Oh yeah, that's also happened to me." But he was one of the people that I blocked, and I'd been following him for so long at this point, and obviously he noticed because well, that's the kind of guy he is, I guess. And he checks that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And obviously, he was, why have you blocked me? What have I done to offend you, kind of thing. And I was like, oh shit, of all the people to have kind of stirred up on Twitter, I thought, oh no, uh, this is going to come back to bite me. But thankfully, we did talk it out at the time, and it was like, yeah, no, this is a genuine bug. I have no idea what's happened. I'm really sorry about this. But yeah, I mean,
You, it's
I'm not the
so
kind of
funny you
person
mentioned
to.
that though, because I would brutally make fun of him for checking. And
Well,
one day I was just like, can you just give me an honest reason why you would ever check who follows and unfollows you? And he's like, yeah, it's part of the app that I use to make sure I don't have fake bots following me.
hmm,
It's like, what are you talking about? And he explained. So he was actually right 4 years ago, 3 years ago, but not anymore. But there were apps you could use and like websites to figure out how many of your followers were bots. And you want to try to keep an eye on that. Back then you did, because there were people who bought followers for a
Mm,
while there. So that it was, and that in itself was very easy to see. If you have somebody with 20,000 followers and the same
mm,
two people are the only ones that comment on their videos, they bought their followers, right? So, but that was a very big negative. You'd get hit in algorithms, you'd get looked down upon if
mm.
people figured it out. And he just never knew that it doesn't matter anymore because these companies have filtered it out themselves. So I haven't heard him complain about that since, because I honestly think that was why he was checking for nerd reasons. And then your
Oh yeah.
stats pop up right there. It's how many are fake, who unfollowed you, who followed you. So yeah, I agree. That was weird until I figured out why he was doing it. And then I apologize. He didn't deserve all the teasing I gave him for it. Just some of it.
To be fair though, I'm glad he did kind of call me out on it, because otherwise I wouldn't have checked and I probably wouldn't have noticed. And like I said, I somehow blocked most of the people I was following. So yeah, very strange. I know there are like block lists and things that you can subscribe to, and there were a couple of like third-party services that I'd logged into using my Twitter account that kind of still had access to it. So I don't know if one of those managed to do that somehow, or Twitter's just strange at times. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't notify me when I get messages and all sorts of stuff. So evidently it doesn't work properly. But
It's
there you
always
go.
been kind of broken. And
Yeah,
also putting block this person is next to mute this conversation. And I
yeah.
mean this with all the respect in the world, but there are so many conversations I'm tagged in that
Mm,
actually have nothing to do with me. I wouldn't add anything to the conversation. It's just filling up my notifications. So I mute a lot of conversations. And so many times I'll be quick on my phone, or I'll be clicking really quickly, and I'll block a whole bunch of people. And then it's the same thing. I'll get somebody will message me like, "Hey man, why'd you block Reese? He's a nice guy." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I didn't block anybody."
well,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Oh well, that's
yeah.
the trouble though, isn't it? Social media. You kind of live and die by it, and people will judge you by your interactions and who you interact with, and all this kind of stuff. So, but unfortunately, if you want to get your name out there, you kind of have to play the game.
Unfortunately, you're right. There's really no way around that. And then everybody. Well, the loudest voices are never the majority, but those are the ones that you have to navigate
Mm,
around. So it's always an interesting scenario to deal with that crap.
no, definitely.
Well, anyway, back on the,
Anyway,
back to your videos and less about bitching about social media. Sorry, that always seems to find its way in these conversations because it's such an overwhelming part of all of our lives that most of my fellow nerds really don't want any part of at all. We just kind of
mm.
have to. So what do you use for equipment to shoot your videos? Like, what's your capture card? What kind of cameras you're using?
I have. I very recently upgraded to a Sony ZV-E10, which is a
Hmm.
4K vlogger camera. Very lucky to get my hands on one of those because they're impossible to get hold of now. I got one kind of just as the component shortage kind of started to hit. Before that, I was recording stuff on my phone. Um, as far as capture cards and stuff, I have owned and still own pretty much most of the stuff that's out there. I'm a big fan of the RetroTink 5X at the minute. Obviously, that does SCART and composite and S video and pretty much everything that you need. I have a StarTech USB 3 HD cap, which I use for PC stuff. Um, yeah, there's obviously microphone wise, I've got the Rode NT USB here, and I use the Rode Video Mic Pro, so pretty standard setup that everyone uses. A load of
Mm.
cheap LED panel lights from Amazon. Um, yeah. As far as capture cards, actually, I don't know if you've. There was one that was announced. I don't know. It was just a couple of days ago called the Medusa. I don't know if you've seen that one.
The capture card called the Medusa?
Not a
No,
capture
but
card. Sorry, an upscaler.
oh yeah, so that's the one that's designed specifically for PC, retro PC stuff, where it can be used with other stuff, but
Hmm.
I think that was the focus. Because I was actually going to ask you when you mentioned the RetroTink 5X.
Hmm.
I'm predominantly a console gamer, and the videos that I do are usually around that. Even though I do love the retro PC stuff too, and the Tink 5X has been awesome for all
Hmm.
of that. But I have heard people say that some retro consoles have had issues with it, so they end up using the OSSC. Have you found any specifically that won't work with the RetroTink 5X?
There was very early on. There was because I was very lucky, and I think I got in on the second batch that Mike sent out, and there was an issue with the Atari ST, with the PAL model of the Atari ST. Obviously, that runs at 50 hertz, and it kind of mostly worked, but there was kind of a weird interference on the screen that kind of popped up at times. And someone actually spotted it in one of my videos, because I was obviously one of the first sort of PAL Atari ST owners to actually use it for videos on YouTube. And said, "Oh, have you mentioned that to Mike?" kind of thing. It's kind of a mutual friend, and he was quite friendly with him, and ended up having a bit of a back and forth, and ended up testing a new version of the firmware which actually fixed that. And I give him some feedback on that, so it was quite cool to be involved with that side of things. But as far as anything else is concerned, I mean, I recently used the 5X for upscaling some old family videos with an old VCR. So I found some old videotapes, and obviously used the composite input on there, and it was fantastic for that as well. So really good kind of all round device. The only one thing that I would ask for, if this is my opportunity, if this is my soapbox, my direct line to Mike to ask for a feature, it would be really cool if it would do like the 70 hertz DOS stuff. Obviously, you can get a hardware VGA to SCART adapter, but it won't accept the what's the resolution? 720 by 400, 70 hertz, I think, DOS. And
So I could be wrong about this, but I believe the chipset on the 5X can't do over 60 hertz. I could be
that would
wrong.
explain it.
I could be remembering what Mike said to me wrong, but I think when it came to those, he had suggested the OSSC because that
Mm,
doesn't change the refresh rate. It's only a line multiplier, whereas the Tink can do both. It could act as a line multiplier, but it still has to buffer a few lines, not frames, a few lines. And in doing so, that means it has to support all of the refresh rates. And I don't think it can go much over 60, because some of these are like 60.002 or something like that.
mm.
It could do up to 61, let's just say, to oversimplify things. But yeah, I could be wrong about that, but I think that's a hardware limitation. And I think that's one of the reasons Mike's always taken the stance of, if you really are focused on retro PCs, maybe check out the OSSC.
Yeah, You see, the reason I say all of this is because I very foolishly sold my OSSC last year when the RetroTink arrived, because I thought, oh, this works with everything. Tried it with a few things, really, really happy with it. Plug and play. Don't need to fiddle with it like you do. Um, Obviously, the OSSC or the standard profiles are really good anyway, but I just found the RetroTink was kind of a bit more plug and play and a bit less fiddly. And I thought, well, I
Mm.
don't need this anymore. So I just, stuck it on eBay, get a bit of cash back. And it was only afterwards that I kind of went to do some capture from some DOS stuff with a PC. And I thought, oh, I needed that. um, yeah,
That's
so
funny.
I've kind of been holding out hope that he's going to add it to the RetroTink, and I don't need to go out and buy another OSSC. But it sounds like I do, so that's
Or
fine.
or
That's
maybe
fine.
this is an opportunity to pick up that new one coming out and do a review, because I would certainly, for anything
Yes.
retro PC focused, I would really hope somebody over in Europe, in the UK or Germany or whatever, would be able to do that review, at least first, because I think that's the focus. And just a side note, it's cool to me how all of these newer products are coming out with their own focus.
Mm,
So, no one's coming out and saying, "Oh, throw away your retro
mm.
tank because this is the new one." Everybody's kind of coming out with their own thing that they're focusing on, which I think is really great. But yeah, I'd be interested to see how that one works with all the different frequencies.
Yeah, I think everyone's kind of living in hope that there's going to be some universal all-in-one solution that's 100% pixel perfect across everything, and it's just not. It's not technically feasible, is it? So that
Yeah.
there's always going to be a need for multiple devices. But then, obviously, I think it's unusual for someone to be into DOS PC gaming and retro console gaming and retro computers and all of that stuff. I think people like you and me are kind of an edge case, and most people just want one to play their old SNES or Dreamcast or whatever, and perfectly happy with it. So, but yeah, the Medusa does look very interesting. So, I think they're based in Poland. I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, you'll be able to get one early and let us all know how it works. And I'm always interested in that stuff.
Mm,
There's also, uh, man, the RetroScaler A1 from Erkin Labs.
yes.
All right, I think I remembered that correctly. So that line doubles everything, and it
Mm,
does it by oversampling and line doubling. So you don't need to set phase at all, but it outputs
okay.
VGA. It stays.
Mm,
It only does the digital conversion in order to do the oversampling. And I might be getting the little details wrong, but I got the concept right because I did a whole video with this thing, and I think that might actually be another great choice, especially if you have retro PCs that are 15 kilohertz that you're trying to use on a VGA monitor.
mm,
Since it's D sub in, VGA out, I think that would be a good tool. It's not cheap at all, but it's very good quality. It's
mm,
OSSC level quality with no settings. You just plug it
mm.
in and it doubles it to that. But I mean, that's kind of a special. It's more of a niche use case in the States, whereas in Europe, with all of the retro PC enthusiasts, I think that's much more of a chance of people having a couple of retro PCs and a VGA CRT monitor that they wanted to put together.
Yeah, and for streaming as well. I mean, I actually I've done a few streams. It's not really a regular thing for me, but I streamed with my IBM 5150 PC, which has a CGA card in it. So I used a CGA to RGB adapter, and then obviously plugged that into the OSSC to upscale it, and then into the capture card. And I actually did a couple of streams with that, just playing, Commander Keen and Loom was another one. So yeah, it's all technically possible.
That CGA adapter, that was just a pin converter, right? That didn't actually need to convert the signal because it's a RGBS 15 kilohertz signal, right?
It was a while back. Yeah, the adapter's called the CGA to RGB, and I think it converts the TTL signals from the CGA card into, um,
To
you know,
lower level SCART
yeah.
voltage to
I
save for
think
SCART,
it's been
right?
a while. I've played with a lot of stuff since then, so I may be misremembering how it works, but it had to be part of the chain for me to get it to work. So,
Yeah, because I've gotten that question a few times, and I've always guessed that it's probably RGBS, and it's probably just a different voltage level on the sync. But I
yeah, I
don't
think
know
so.
because I don't really have access to any of that. The one old computer I have, my buddy Justin's still holding on for me. Maybe I'll get it back at some point now that I have a place to put it. But it's an old Tandy 1000 with an RGB monitor hooked up to it. So I mean that thing hasn't even booted in 10 years, I think at least. So let's hopefully that'll still work. But then at least I'd be able to have some kind of older computer to do those experiments with.
Mm. Yeah, a very cool era of computing, really. The kind of the old Tandy 1000 and the IBM 5150, and obviously we had the Amstrads over here with the 8086 CPU, and really interested because obviously because of my age, I kind of just caught the very tail end of that era. So, and obviously being kind of from a computer science background as well myself, I'm kind of very interested in kind of where it all started and where the whole PC thing kind of came from. So really interesting stuff to tinker with. Interesting to see how far we've come in the past 35 years.
Yeah, it's also kind of um, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the upcoming generations because people like us that grew up in command line and DOS and heck basic my first computer had a
Mm,
TRS-80. It's when something happens on our computer screens, nerds that have been doing this since the 80s understand how it gets from click to on the screen. Obviously not everybody, but people who programmed on PCs used this stuff. So I'm kind of interested to see the kids that are just hitting their teens now, when they start to become development age, they get into business, they start working on this. Is that going to be a detriment because we already have all of this origin knowledge, or are people just going to do really great, skip to the end tutorials, and you don't really need to figure out how you got here? My guess is that it's going to be a mix of sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. That'll kind of be interesting to see.
yeah, I mean, I think I can't really imagine what it must be like to grow up with smartphones and the internet and all that kind of thing. Because obviously, and I'm sounding like an old man here, saying get off my lawn and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't have I didn't have a phone, and we didn't have the internet at home until sort of the mid '90s. Till I was kind of 11 or 12ish, and it was very much a sit down at the family PC in the corner and dial up, and you had an hour or so on the internet every evening, and that was all you were allowed, kind of thing. And that's what it was like in our house up until sort of 99 2000 kind of time, because we kind of lived in quite a rural area, and were quite late to get broadband. So yeah, for kids these days, you see kids of like 7 or 8, and they've got smartphones, and they're constantly online and on social media and stuff. It makes you wonder. It does.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of industries that have changed like this. Like, you imagine growing up in the 60s working on cars,
Mm.
and now, now you try to go work on a car you just bought, and it's like, it should have been a computer engineering degree. Like, other than unbolting the wheels, like, what else is the same here? It's all different. So it's kind of funny to see all the industries and how some of them are fairly the same and some of them have just changed wildly.
Mm.
So, I guess, in all of the videos that you've done, do you have one that, if somebody said, what's the best one to start for your channel to get, to get to know your work, do you have one that you would suggest for people?
That's a very good question.
I mean, the easy answer is have somebody just scroll through your videos and pick a topic that's relevant to whatever they're interested in at the moment. But I mean, as more of a general intro.
I actually specifically got this out as a prop for this conversation. I have the Atari video music here, which is not only one of my favorite gadgets, also one of my favorite videos that I've made on my channel. So I imported that from the US because obviously they didn't sell those here, and that's been converted with an S-Video video output mod and 230 volt mod, so obviously I can plug it in the UK. Change the side panels for actual real wood, because the ones that were on there originally were completely sort of beat up and destroyed. And obviously made a video of that whole process. So that's one of my favourites, and that's a fairly recent one. But yeah, I like to think there's kind of something for everyone. There's some console stuff. There's some kind of like I say, like home entertainment kind of stuff. There's a couple of game reviews on there. I did the Mister multi-system. Obviously, I was very lucky to get on the first batch of those as well, and did one of the first reviews that kind of went out there on that as well. So yeah, a little bit of everything. But I like to think that with every video that I do, I like to sort of kind of tweak things and improve things, and I kind of look back on my older videos and think, oh yeah, here's something that I'm doing slightly better today, and my lighting's slightly better, or my audio's slightly better, or the editing's slightly better, or whatever. So every video that I release, it's like, don't look at the older stuff, look at the last sort of 3 or 4. But
Yeah.
I think it's probably all good. I think I'm probably just my own worst critic.
I mean, you have to be, right?
Yeah.
You have to continuously analyze yourself to get better. Otherwise, you're never going to get better. And everybody else is going to get better around you, and you're going to stay the same, which basically means you got worse. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a software developer in my day job, and obviously quite famously in software development, they say if you don't look back at the code that you wrote a year ago and you're absolutely horrified, then you're not developing and kind of progressing. So I guess the same must hold true for videos as well.
yeah, for me personally, it's not so much the editing and the how it looks and sounds, because that's one of those things where I think everybody that comes into my channel knows that I'm not My Life in Gaming. I'm not Digital Foundry. I try my best to aspire to be, but I'll never be. But the thing that gets me is when I go back to a video and I'm just like, why wouldn't I have just said, and this is what lag is, and add a 15-second thing just saying that before what I just said? Because how, you can't expect everybody to watch all of your videos before they get to this one. So that's the biggest thing for me, is I'll get so sucked into a subject, and then I'll go back and see that video afterwards, or I'll be taking a walk and it'll pop into my head like, why didn't you add that to the video? Like, what do you like, why would you have skipped that? You took that for granted. So those are the ones that drive me nuts. I always want to make sure to be as good of a teacher as I possibly can for these. And yeah, I drop the ball all the time with the little stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of have to make that judgment and kind of know your audience. And I think we're probably quite similar in the type of videos that we make, in that we always try to, as well as kind of showing something and presenting something, obviously you kind of aim to educate people as well. But it's knowing kind of what what level people are on and where to start at. And obviously, you don't want to oversimplify things and insult people's intelligence, but at the same time, you don't want to assume that they know too much and confuse everyone. So it's quite a difficult balancing act sometimes.
Yeah, you have to find that middle ground, and you're never going to please anybody. Like I
No, you
put a
can't please
joke in the
everyone.
last video because the Mister video that I just put out was, you already know what Mister is. You've
Mm,
already understood that, there's going to be a process. So here's how you do that process. It's basically like a 10-minute ad for My Life in Gaming's video, or vice versa. You could say that their video, mine's just like they could send people to me, like, if you don't, just go to here to
mm,
get it done. And I made a joke about unzipping a file because in a bunch of my tutorials that were meant in the same way, like, you already know what a Raspberry Pi is, you already
mm,
understand what 240p is. Here's a very quick primer. If you're that person, you already know how to unzip a file. And if you don't, if you've already signed on to doing this, typing into a search browser, how do I unzip a file, is the right thing to do. If you're smart enough to decide that you want to use a Raspberry Pi, you should be smart enough to learn how to use the search feature. So I put a little dig in there about that, and it was so funny to see some of the responses, because it's like, you know, you can never please them all. You get I get people complaining that why would I have put that joke in? I get people saying, why wouldn't you teach people how to unzip a file? And it's like, you always got to hit your middle ground of like what you're trying to accomplish. And, asking a question is never, ever stupid.
no.
Blaming the other person for not explaining something you should know going in, it's a little stupid. So,
Well, it's all good for engagement, isn't it? So people will always come along and
yeah,
correct you in the comments.
I'm
Um,
still not really sure how the engagement thing works totally. So I just kind
no,
of ride along and see what happens.
I think anyone who claims to understand how the algorithm actually works is probably trying to sell you something.
Mm.
It's a bit of a dark art, but yeah, it's funny you should mention your Mr. video, because obviously I watched your video, but I haven't watched the My Life in Gaming one yet. I've got it on my watch later list, as it has been since it came out. But
So for
obviously,
somebody like you're going to know everything that they say in the video. You're not going to learn anything new, but I think you're still going to be really entertained at how they present it to you. It's one of those
exactly,
things. It's like watching a documentary about a subject you already know everything about. It's interesting to see somebody else's take on it,
yeah,
especially people like Mark and Corey who make it visually look pretty at the same time. So yeah, that's why I liked their videos so much, is because people like us who already are deep into the Mister project could be entertained by it. And as long as you kind of know what there's something called Mister, and here's kind of what it is, those people could jump into it and learn a lot too. So I think that was a pretty good one. Epic though. 2 hours
that
and 40 minutes.
well,
Epic.
that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's one of those channels where you don't want to just put it on in the background. You want to kind of sit and actually watch it actively and kind of give it your full attention. And it's just finding the time to sit down and watch a 3 hour video on Mister. I think it's a fantastic thing that people are putting that kind of really um, the kind of feature length stuff out there and really going into the proper deep technical detail and stuff. I absolutely love that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't want to do them a disservice by kind of not paying attention to it. So I'm saving it for when I've got time to actually sit down and watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's what I do with most of my friends' videos that are like that. The ones podcasts I always listen to. So
Mm,
that's why I always tell people, like, thank you very much for the support and for watching on YouTube to get those clicks up. But listen any way that you want, whatever's the easiest way. Because I love to either have my earbuds in or just my phone on speakerphone mode, and just listening to podcasts as I'm walking around working. That's
mm,
great, and you could still absorb it totally. But whenever there's things that you rely on visual cues, and especially stuff that's as well shot as them, Digital
mm.
Foundry, like I treat it like a movie. I sit down, I watch it. Even a lot of MVG stuff, Modern Vintage Gamer,
Oh yeah.
a lot of his B-roll is just that. It's just to keep you visually entertained if you happen to be sitting there. But some of it is very pertinent to what he's talking about. So I always try to make the time to actually sit and watch his videos for the most part. Some he has, just opinion based stuff, which I like too, like the last PlayStation, the PlayStation Network thing update. I think he nailed that. I think the emulation is going to be terrible. Let's hope it isn't.
Yeah, I've MVG is another one I've been watching for a very long time, and it seems that obviously we've kind of had similar interests over the years and stuff with the original Xbox emulation. Obviously, he was quite sort of deeply involved with that, and yeah, he's one of those. there's kind of a short list of channels that I have that whenever they drop a new video, it's like, oh, okay, drop everything and watch it. And MVG is on that list for me, depending on the subject. If it's something kind of an opinion piece on current affairs or something, then maybe I'll leave it a little bit longer and get round to it. But if it's like a deep dive into an NES emulator or something like that, it's like, no, I've got to watch this because this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, there's so many great people out there. It's very easy to get sucked into some of the bad stuff that happens, and while it is very striking sometimes, the reason it is because the majority of people in the scene are just awesome. So when you have somebody that isn't, it really stands out and kind of like sucks the fun out of that day. But there are so many good people. MVG is definitely one of them, and it's really great to see a lot of the knowledge that's been spread and done in a way where it doesn't feel like you're in a lecture hall bored to death. Like you're actually interested in what's coming next.
Yeah, and it's quite a small community, isn't it? Really, when you kind of get into it, it's kind of lots of people know each other, and if you kind of don't actively participate in that community and you don't sort of contribute to it positively, then people will work you out pretty quickly. And if you're just in it to kind of take stuff and just for your own purposes or whatever, then I think the successful ones are the people that give a lot back. I think that's the point I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, agreed 100%. It's it's kind of interesting to see different communities and how they work and how how they communicate, how welcoming or unwelcoming they might be, and it's also interesting to see who gets to be the biggest, because it's being behind the scenes, you could see who really worked hard and really earned it and deserves every follower and every penny they get from it. And you can also kind of see the dark side too, where it's like, I think I know exactly how you got right where you are, and stepping on the heads of others going up the ladder. It's like, so it's interesting to see, and the communities very often follow, like we were saying, earlier when we started. The personalities tend to match a lot of the following sometimes.
I mean, like Neil from RMC. Obviously, I've done some stuff with him, and I did that Atari show and tell with him a few weeks back. Really, really genuine guy, and he works so hard, and everything that he does, he kind of commits to 100%. And obviously, he's developed the Mister Multi system and the coloring book that he did, and the retro tea breaks book, and he's still putting out videos every single week, and he's built the cave, and it's like, whoa, and he still has this amazing Discord community that he's actively involved with, and he's in there chatting to people every day. And it's like, I genuinely don't understand how he finds the time to do all of this stuff. And obviously met him in person a few times and kind of worked with him on some stuff. He is 100% genuine, and how he doesn't have a million subscribers, I don't know, but there you go.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him that much. Every single time I have, it's been positive. It's kind of funny too, because at some point, somebody mentioned something about a rivalry between us, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh.
I've never said anything bad, or if I have, I got the name wrong or something. I meant to see CMR instead of RMC, or like whatever. Like, and I don't. Neil's certainly never said anything, and I always kind of wondered where that came from. And the other day I meant to message him, and I couldn't remember if I had messaged him last on Discord or on Twitter. And I happened to look on Twitter, and there was a message from him from years ago, just friendly chatting. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? Was it just somebody else misunderstood? Was it some crazy fan starting shit? Or like, there's never been a rivalry. I've never said anything bad about them. So yeah, I don't. That would always kind of crack me up. But yeah, no, nothing but good things to say about Neil so far. Everything's been great. I hope to hang out with him and do an interview with him at some point too. I know how busy we both are, so it's kind of hard to make that happen sometimes.
No, I can't imagine him having a rival with anyone. To be honest, I mean, he doesn't have a bad word to say about anyone. In fact, I actually messaged him when you got in touch with me, saying, "Oh, Bob from RetroRGB wants to interview me," and he was really pleased with me. He was like, "Oh yeah, Bob, he's a really nice guy," kind of thing. So
cool. Well, hey, glad that
evidently no bad blood on his side. So
yeah, it's funny how that stuff works itself out. But no, never had any bad things to say. And I love what he's doing with the cave. I think that's such a cool idea. I always wanted to do something similar to that here, and it was actually kind of sort of falling into place. And in early 2020, it looked like it was going to happen, and then obviously. So now I think everybody that was involved in that was like, yeah, I'm not going to deal with that now. We'll come back to that in a couple of years. So we'll see if that ever happens. And just for the record, because we were just talking about rivalries, I'm not. That wasn't a backhanded way of saying that Neil stole my idea. Like, it's just parallel thinking. Of course, two people who are deep in this hardware would think, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we put it all in one room and had people come over?" Like, no, it's just parallel thinking. Say,
Oh,
I'm sure a lot of people have the same idea.
Oh, it's the dream, isn't it? Because the thing is, we're all the kind of people who like to acquire stuff and play with it and fiddle with it. And obviously, if you have a museum, it's kind of the ultimate excuse to just acquire as much stuff as possible and spend all day, every day playing with it. So yeah, I imagine there's quite a lot of people who would like to do that. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the other thing too. I was just talking about this, I think, on one of my Q&As or something. But one of the things that I always thought would be such a neat thing is to pick a display that you feel like matches the console really well. So, like in early '80s RF TV hooked up,
Mm,
via just the two prong RF to an Atari 2600. For whatever reason, NES looks in composite looks amazing on Commodore 64 monitors. Just those, the basic monitors with composite in,
mm.
and having a place like the cave to where you might be able to do something like that, and I just think would be really neat, because I think each console came out at a time when displays had changed ever so slightly. And even from like the NES to SNES era, you started to see more TVs with S video in them. Even if you wouldn't have noticed back then, like I got, I think, a 1989 TV sitting behind me there that has S video, and I would have never known to look for it back then. And so you could kind of match up consoles and computers with displays based on the era, and I think that would be a pretty neat part of the experience as well.
Yeah, because I've been to other museums, and they tend to have modern LCD TVs. Now, I totally understand why, because obviously they don't tend to explode, or
Yes.
and they're a lot cheaper to run and kick out a lot less heat and that kind of stuff. But yeah, one thing that Neil's done at the cave is that he does have the kind of the matching CRT monitors for every single machine that he has on display. Um, as far as I know, he's only had one actually blow up on him, but yeah, it's got to be quite an undertaking just to kind of maintain that all and keep it all working.
Yes. Yes. That is another part of why you can't just throw a bunch of TVs in a room, plug some consoles in, and say, "Okay, we have a cave, go for it." Like, no, it's a lot more work than that. And I think,
Mm,
I think Neil knew that going into it, though.
mm.
Do you have a favorite display then that you like to use? Do you have your favorite monitor or something, or are you just primarily, conversion to digital when you can?
No, I one thing I am known for is owning a lot of CRTs. I think it was 17 at last count. Um,
Nice.
it's a bit of a problem. Yeah, maybe a bit of a fetish even. Um, the main one I tend to use is this one behind me, which is a JVC PVM type thing, just because it happens to fit quite nicely into that spot there. Um, but yeah, I mean, like my Atari STs, I've got the matching Atari monitors, and obviously with my PCs, I tend to go. I like to have the same brand monitor as the PC, if possible, with the matching accessories like the matching keyboard and mouse and speakers and everything. So it gives me something to work towards, kind of putting these systems together. Um,
Isn't it
yeah,
funny how that entire experience changed? Because when we were growing up, all the way up until early 2000s, you had your branded computer, you had your branded mouse with your desktop and your monitor, and it all matched and it was all the same. And nowadays, like, you get a nice keyboard and mouse, you have your nice monitor, and then whatever box you plug into it, whether you make it or buy it, doesn't even, it's kind of an afterthought now, and that there's not a matching set of things anymore.
Hmm. Although I think we are much better off these days with the quality of the mice and the keyboards and monitors and stuff. Some of that kind of
Totally.
bundled stuff, especially like towards the kind of the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, was pretty terrible. Especially like the keyboards are just awful. So, but yeah, if you want the authentic period experience, you have to have all of the matching bits and pieces, or at least in my mind, anyway. Like I say, maybe it's just some strange fetish that I have.
No, there's something about it. There's something about, it's exactly like console games, in that a good game is a good game, period, end of story.
Hmm.
So if you have a lag-free way to play a classic game, in a controller that feels good to your hands, then it's a win. but it's not the same as taking your cartridge, plugging it in, flipping the
Mm.
switch, holding the original controller that it came with, even if it only had a 6-inch long cable or whatever the heck those old consoles used to have sometimes. And it doesn't change the game. It changes the experience. And I think it's the same with those classic computers, in that, unless you have a 3 foot deep key press,
Yeah.
with a loud click and, a bunch of the clanks of the disk drive and the tape drives. And, that is really the experience of it. So if your goal, I guess it's just my opinion, of course, but if your goal is just to check out older software, you could do that through so many of the amazing emulation
Mm.
ways of doing it. But if your goal is to try out what a classic computer would be like, that is absolutely a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to sort of evangelize, and I'm not a fanboy for any particular approach or anything like that. I mean, I've got the Mister. I love the Mister. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I have RetroArch running on my NVIDIA Shield plugged into my TV downstairs, and sometimes I'll just sit on the sofa with a wireless controller and play, old SNES games or Mega Drive games or whatever. And I own the original hardware, but ultimately, I think as long as people are kind of preserving those games and enjoying them as they were intended, and that's kind of what keeps the history alive. So however you want to experience that, it's all cool with me.
Yeah, I always like to say there's so many right ways to experience it,
Yeah,
and the only wrong way is with a ton of lag, or
yeah,
or if the image is processed so badly that you can't even tell what it was originally.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
No, totally agreed.
So do you have a favorite of those CRTs that you have? I mean, obviously in the context of you want them to match, but is there one that really stands out as like, wow, this one's still in great shape, or this one looks the best, or whatever?
So one that was quite a very lucky find. I have. Uh, oh, it's buried. I have a there's a PC manufacturer in the UK called RM, or Research Machines, and they made all of the school PCs back in the 90s and kind of early 2000 kind of era. And I very specifically remember when I was at school using these 486 PCs. The kind of the famous one that they made was the RM Nimbus, which was one of the very few PCs that used a 186 processor, which I don't have. But anyway, that's a whole different rabbit hole. But very specifically remember using this 486 PC at school, and I actually managed to get my hands on one about 20 years ago, and they don't come up for sale very often at all. But then, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was browsing through eBay looking at PC CRT monitors for something else, for a completely different project. And there was a guy selling just a pile of monitors. It was basically just, pay your money and come and take your pick kind of thing. And I spotted in that pile that there was an RM monitor that actually matched that PC. And I'd never seen one for sale. And obviously, as far as this guy was concerned, these monitors were all just junk and he just wanted to get rid of them. And it just so happened that it was about 10 minutes drive from my house. So yeah, I paid my £20 or whatever it was, if, if it was even that, and went and picked up this RM monitor, perfect match for this PC that I'd remembered using as a kid. And I've got the complete setup now with the matching mouse and keyboard and monitor and the PC and everything. And yeah, every time I post that PC on Instagram or on Twitter or whatever, people are always like, "Oh my god, I remember those! I remember using those at school." And it's like, yeah, it's just a really cool thing to own, just the complete setup. So if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be that one. But obviously, in the context of the PC that it goes with, just because of just because it's a cool sort of complete package, really.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny because I do, I love all the CRDs that I have mostly, and but for all different reasons and for different, for different use cases and stuff like that. So it's kind of fun to see that other people's, to see other people's perception of that as well. So I love that story. That's a good one. I got to ask though, what's a 186? Because I grew up with the 286 Tandy 1000, and then obviously then I followed 386, 486, then the Cerex 586 and 686 chips, which was, they worked, but it was obviously a marketing scam to make you feel like it was a totally different architecture. And then there was the 8088s before that, before the
Mm.
286, but I have never seen or heard of a 186 before.
No, and it's one of those things where you mention it and people are like, oh, well, that didn't exist, you're obviously mistaken. But yeah, it's one of those really weird things. So obviously there was the 8086 and there was the, obviously, like you say, the 286. Um, but the 186 was something that Intel designed for kind of embedded systems, and it kind of integrated a lot of stuff into the CPU. And it was never intended to be used in normal PCs. And obviously, RM, for some reason, decided that they could cut costs and make it sort of a very low cost PC aimed at schools by using this particular industrial CPU. And if you go on Wikipedia and look at the 80186 page on Wikipedia, and there is one, and it has a list of machines that actually used it, and there's like four or five, and one of them is the RM Nimbus, which all British people of a particular age will remember using at school. And the other cool thing about that PC is that it used the microchannel architecture as well, which was obviously used, I think, in the IBM PS2. So really, really weird machine, and one that's quite desirable for collectors nowadays, just because it is such an oddball. And it's also not particularly IBM compatible either, so there isn't really much that will actually run on it. But there you go. That's usually the case with these weird ones, isn't it?
So I just pulled up the Wikipedia page as you were explaining,
Mm.
and I think the branding of it is what stands out. So when you see in your mind 286, 386, 486 DX, all of those, I think the branding was 8086 or 80186, and same
Yeah.
thing with the 8088 or the 80188. And I think so while you're 100% correct, my guess, just in looking at the words printed in front of me, is that's probably how Intel went down that naming scheme. Because Intel's been notorious for shit names since the
Oh
day
yeah.
that company was released. I don't think anybody, including Intel, would deny that in the slightest bit. So there's probably some nerd like throw a one in it, and that'll be our designator for embedded. So
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing. It's ultimately it's an 8086 at its core. Like I say, it just has. I don't know exactly what they integrated onto it, whether it's stuff like the memory controller and stuff like that, but it was aimed at embedded systems and that kind of thing. And yeah, like I say, they never intended it for it to ever be used in a PC. So quite how that came about, I don't know. But if you can find a picture of an RM Nimbus as well, I mean, it's a really cool looking PC. It's
I've
very
seen those
square and
PCs. Yeah.
angular, and yeah,
It's funny too because the Wikipedia page says it was launched in 1982 and discontinued in 2007.
yeah,
And as funny as that might sound, that actually is totally in line with a lot of the things that Intel does, because their embedded line is guaranteed for 10 years, but the
mm,
stuff that's used in basically the stuff that sells, they'll just make until you don't buy it anymore. So it's kind of one of those things where I could totally see like a bunch of industrial equipment where the 80186 processor just runs the microphone boom arm. I don't know,
yeah.
pick something useless, and people keep buying them, so they just keep making them, and so that's kind of funny to think, but it's a long time. It's over 25 years to produce a chip. So
And then
not many chips get made, or not many CPUs get made that long. There's tons of chips that do, but
mm, and then inevitably, some company that's making some obscure device that uses that CPU. Once Intel announced that it's end of life, rather than kind of redesign the thing, they'll just buy a whole warehouse full of them from Intel and just carry on manufacturing them until they run out of them, 10 years later. So
funny, a lot of the times that happens, the decision is made because the person who designed whatever needs that
yes,
chip is gone, whether they passed or just quit or whatever else. So they don't really know what to do. And their
mm,
guess is that it would cost more to have somebody come in, reverse engineer it, re engineer it, and add a new chip. It would cost a lot more than just buying a warehouse of these chips and
yeah,
continuing to make them. So I'm wondering, that's something that's cropping up a lot more. And I'm wondering how much that'll affect things going forward. There's been a case too. The one I'm remembering is at Texas Instruments, where they have a chip that does like three things, and everybody that buys it, 99% use it for one thing. And then a company bought like 10,000 of them to use for the thing that, the least use case. And then they called them up and said, hey, we bought 10,000 of these and they're not working at all. And, they're like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. And then it came out that, yeah, the person who designed that chip is long gone. Nobody knows
mm,
how it works. No one knows why that function was there in the first place, how to troubleshoot it. So send us all the chips back. You have to find another thing, and we'll remove that functionality from our documentation.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So, what's next on the agenda for you? Do you have videos coming up that that you think are something you'd really want to share with people? Do you just have kind of like this is fun, show up if you're in the mood type of videos? I do those too, of course.
I have. So a year or so ago, I made a video about the S3 Verge, which was an early 3D. I'm sure you're aware, but an early 3D graphics card for the PC that kind of predated the Voodoo cards. And I kind of really nerded out on that one and tracked down every single game that had an S3 Verge specific renderer built in. And I downloaded the ISOs of all of those and burnt them to CDs and installed them on the PC and went through every single game in turn. I think there's not all that many. I think it's maybe 20 or so, and captured some footage and did kind of a mini review of each game. And there was one that I couldn't find at the time, which is a game called Whiplash or Fatal Racing, depending on which part of the world you're from. And it was a version that was bundled with a particular HP OEM bundle. In I think it was sold in a couple of countries in Europe. So I think Italy was kind of the main one. And I said, if anyone out there has this particular OEM bundle CD of this version of this game, please get in touch and let me know. And 6 months after that video went out, someone actually emailed me completely out of the blue saying, "Is this the CD that you're looking for?" and sent me like a scan of the actual CD itself. And it was like, whoa, yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think they weren't particularly overly technical, so I kind of talked them through the process of ripping the CD and getting it uploaded to archive.org, which thankfully they did. And I've now installed that on the Verge PC that I have, which is an MMX 233 system, and captured the footage of that and kind of scripted a bit of a review of that particular release of that game. Incredibly sad and nerdy thing to do, but it was kind of the one missing piece of that video that I put together, and it kind of really made my day that somebody would reach out and actually sort of go to that effort to get that to me. So that's coming
Yeah.
up in the very near future. I just kind of want to do it justice, just because it is kind of that final missing piece of that huge project.
That's
Yeah.
really awesome. And I don't think a single person listening to this would agree with you. I think everybody would think that was awesome, and the effort that you went through is worth it. And I think everybody would even be grateful to the person who scanned the CD and helped you rip it. I think that's a big part of what we do, right? Like a lot of our
Mm.
stuff is focused on the future. My focus is on, promoting other people in the scene and new products coming up and new businesses around these products. But the root of what we do is in the old stuff. So taking the time to preserve them, without that, there would be no need for any of the new stuff. So I think everybody would agree that that's freaking awesome, and they're happy that you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really big on preservation. So, I mean, like the Atari Panther stuff. So the Atari Panther. I'm going down often a completely different tangent here, but it was a console that was in development at Atari in the late '80s that was cancelled, and I recently, in the past couple of months, stumbled across a load of information that was kind of spread across forums, and some of it had kind of succumbed to bit rot, been taken offline, and I had to go digging through archive.org and through the Wayback Machine, and kind of pulled all of that together and made a page on my website, just basically just citing all of those first-hand sources and copying and pasting it all in and linking to everything and kind of trying to build up the most complete picture I could about that console, just because that information was kind of starting to disappear and starting to get lost. Um, and that's kind of the approach that I take with a lot of the stuff that I do. That I do a lot of research for my videos, and anything that I kind of come across, I like to either get it uploaded to archive.org so it's preserved, or get it on my website and just make sure that the next person that comes along that's kind of obsessed with whatever strange thing it is, at least has the stuff that I've already found as kind of a starting point to go on. And it was the same with that S3 Verge project, and like I say, the Atari Panther thing, and a couple of other things that I've done over the years as well.
That's awesome. And I think, on the surface, what you're doing is cool, but I think that, yeah, I mean this with respect, but people that aren't deep into this stuff don't really see that the work that you do on one thing might directly affect something that on the surface seems completely unrelated. But some of the research that is done on a lot of these projects and some of the archiving of the information, it connects a lot of dots and
Mm.
things, and it really is helpful for development or for just history reasons. So even if it's not a subject that I had any knowledge about beforehand, I still have tons of respect for anybody who takes the time to do all that and work on preserving the stuff. So
I think, I mean, obviously, I don't want this to come across as me trying to be too profound or anything strange like that. But obviously, this digital stuff, computers and the internet and gaming is such an important part of our lives nowadays, and the history of that and kind of all of the development of that technology that kind of led us to be where we are today is an important part of human history. I think it's important to know where we came from and how stuff developed. And the trouble is, a lot of stuff that was kind of put out there on the early internet, unfortunately, is starting to disappear now. So I think it is important to kind
100%.
of dig that out and kind of put it out there. And that's kind of, as well as the project videos, and this is what I'm working on at the minute. That's kind of a focus of mine with the bigger documentary style stuff as well. Just to kind of put this stuff out there and do my bit to kind of amplify that signal and make sure that information doesn't get lost.
Mm. Yeah, I love it. I
I mean,
wish I had more time to contribute to a lot of those projects as well, but it's just we have the ability now for the first time in human history to have an accurate or a much more accurate retelling of what's happened.
hmm,
And with the ability to save all of this stuff, especially in the tech world, because that was the literally software, it's the software that ran all this. So it's important to have a true accounting of what happened so you could learn from it, grow from it, and all of that. And although I completely didn't intend to, that comment I made before about I wonder what the next generations of kids who become developers, are they going to need that? Now that we're talking about it and now that we're saying it in this context, I really do think whether they know it or not, it'll play a big part in what they end up doing.
yeah. And the thing is, one thing I have noticed with my channel is that uh, there's a surprising number of young people who didn't grow up with this stuff, who are genuinely interested in it and do genuinely want to learn about it. So probably in the same way that I'd be interested in learning about like computers from the 60s and 70s and stuff, just because I I want to kind of build up that complete picture of how everything's kind of evolved over time. So yeah, making that accessible to people and in a format that is easy to pick up. I mean, obviously you can go onto YouTube and watch videos on all sorts of different subjects. So
Yeah.
I think it's an amazing thing.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap this one up. I would definitely like to do another one with you. I'm
Okay,
sure you're going to do a subject at some point that I'm going to be like, I'm going to pick Reese's brain about this one. Let's do another one of this. So just expect an annoying message at some point, like, "Hey Reese, we got to do another. I want to learn
that's
about
fine.
that."
That's
Now I
fine.
will link, of course, to your Patreon, to your YouTube channel, Instagram, and everywhere else that I've seen your social media. And is there any other place that you want to direct people to other than the stuff that's directly linked anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much covers it. I do have my website, Ctrl-Alt-Rees.com.
Hmm.
There are some, like I say, any kind of background research that I do for videos, I tend to put on there as well. So, but that's all linked from the kind of video descriptions and stuff as well. Anyway, so just for people looking to kind of take a bit of a deeper dive into stuff, like to cite all of my sources and have all of that available. So yeah, but the YouTube channel is kind of the main thing, the main focus point, the kind of jumping off point for everything else.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for your time, and we'll definitely do this again.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the opportunity and for the chat. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, hopefully talk again soon.